This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Somehow it's almost fall, so don't be surprised if you see me in cardigans, basically cosplaying as Mr. Rogers over the next few months. Here's what we got for y'all. Normally, more than half the people working the polls during an election are over 61 years old. We'll tell you more about a recruiting effort to have younger people take over for older, more at-risk poll workers. Plus, President Trump let slip something noteworthy about a secret weapon system during an interview for Bob Woodward's new book. We'll have some experts weigh in on that. But first, here's what you need to know right now.
Everything is underwater. Buildings. This is crazy.
Streets are turning into rivers in the Gulf Coast. Hurricane Sally might only be moving at 3 miles an hour, but she's still packing quite a punch. The storm made landfall as a Category 2 hurricane this morning, crawling along parts of Alabama and Florida. In Pensacola, the storm surge measured about 5.5 feet high. Meteorologists predict up to 35 inches of rain for some areas. That's almost 3 feet. Hurricane Sally's winds are expected to weaken as it moves further inland, but several areas are still on high alert.
The important safety messages that we want to make sure that we convey to our people right now is please stay put. We have serious conditions along our roadways.
This marks the second hurricane to hit the Gulf Coast in less than 3 weeks, in what appears to be one of the busiest hurricane seasons ever. 20 tropical storms and hurricanes have already been named in the Atlantic this storm season, and we still have 2.5 months to go. When there's a COVID vaccine, you might not have to pay for it. At least, that's the idea in a report issued to Congress today. Officials say billions of dollars in taxpayers' funding should cover the costs. An administration fee could still be charged by doctors' offices, clinics, and pharmacies, but will either be paid for by private insurance, Medicaid, or federal funding. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention also created a playbook for states and city governments to use in preparation for the vaccine. They have a month to submit plans to receive and distribute the shots, which will require special handling. Most of the vaccine candidates right now require 2 doses, more than 20 days apart. The playbook says both doses need to come from the same manufacturer, even if multiple vaccines from different drug makers are approved at the same time. But are people willing to get the shot? A new poll from the Associated Press showed 1 in 5 Americans said they would not get the coronavirus vaccine when it's available. A shocking whistleblower complaint out of an ICE detention center in Georgia has been making the rounds. A nurse alleges that a gynecologist has performed hysterectomies on detained women without their knowledge or consent. The operation removes all or part of the uterus, often leaving a woman sterile. The whistleblower nurse says while some women may have needed the procedure, quote, "Everyone's uterus cannot be that bad." She spoke to several detained women at the Irwin County Detention Center who told her they did not fully understand why they had to get a hysterectomy. The whistleblower complaint also alleges medical neglect at the facility by refusing to test detainees for coronavirus, withholding test results, and falsifying medical records. Top congressional Democrats are calling for a federal investigation. They are demanding an urgent response and a briefing on the status of the investigation by September 25th.
If these horrific reports are true, we as a nation have an obligation to bring those responsible for this unquestionable violation of human rights to justice.
Most American voters will be eligible to vote by mail in this year's general election, and a good chunk of them are younger folks, millennials and Gen Zers. But a new recruiting effort wants to make sure young folks aren't just voting, but also helping work the polls and taking over for the older, more at-risk poll workers. Newsy's Shira Tarlow explains.
In a normal election year, more than half the people working the polls are over 61. But in an election year beset by a global pandemic, new recruitment efforts are focusing on teens.
I'm so frustrated looking at the state of our country, but I'm also frustrated knowing that I won't be able to vote in November. So I'm hoping that by being a poll worker, I can help some people vote, even though I myself cannot.
To combat potential staffing shortfalls, 19-year-old Kai Turomaki helped launch the Poll Hero project, focused on attracting high schoolers and college students to take the place of veteran poll workers, many who are at higher risk for COVID-19 complications.
I knew before going into this project that there was a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of, activist energy among young people right now. But participating in this project and working to recruit poll workers has really, really underlined that for me and just shown me the full extent of that.
Since its launch in late July, the nonpartisan group has recruited over 20,000 people to work the polls this November, most of them in their late teens.
There is no number that we will reach where we'll say, that's it, we can pack it up, we've done a good enough job, we have enough poll workers, because there's no number where we can be absolutely sure of that. We have to make sure that every polling station in the country has the people they need to be run.
Some states allowed those as young as 16 to work the polls. Those interested can sign up on Poll Hero's website. The group then helps volunteers figure out if they're eligible and guides them through the process of applying to their local election board. For those not yet old enough to vote, working the polls may feel like a way to participate in the democratic process, even without casting a ballot.
People are really, really fired up to do everything they can to participate in the election. And even there's a lot of people who can't vote yet, 16, 17-year-olds who in their states might be eligible to work the polls. And even they are really, really enthusiastic to work the polls. In fact, even more so in some cases because they can't vote yet. So that's their sole way to engage with the democratic process.
Staffing the polls has been a long-time challenge. Think 12-hour days, minimal pay, lots of responsibility. It's become even harder amid the pandemic, with many older volunteers opting to stay at home. And though a record number of Americans are expected to vote by mail this November, every state will still allow voters to cast their ballot in person if they choose, with election officials still looking for help for this November. Shira Tarlow, Newsy, Washington.
Somehow I keep getting random texts urging me to register to vote, which I've already done, so I'm gonna go on a quick blocking spree. I should be done by the time you're back. Backtracking isn't usually seen as a good thing, but I know some Big Ten fans that'll say otherwise. Here's what's trending. An unexpected reversal from the Big Ten as the College Football Conference now says it will go on this fall with a shortened 8-game season. This is a total 180 from the conference's announcement about a month ago that it had canceled its fall season. Big Ten and other college conferences who put the kibosh on football this year have been under tremendous pressure from players, their parents, alumni, and even the president to let the games go on, even as the coronavirus tears through college campuses and the COVID death toll nears 200,000 nationwide. The Big Ten says players will be tested for the virus daily and that the season will begin October 23rd. Several celebrities froze their IG and Facebook accounts for 24 hours Wednesday to punish Facebook for their failure to address hateful comments and misinformation. The effort, called #StopHateForProfit, includes names like Kim Kardashian West, Katy Perry, and Leonardo DiCaprio. Facebook has struggled to deal with hate speech and misinformation on its platform. Last month, Facebook launched its Voting Information Center to help give voters up-to-date info and official resources to help you prepare for the general election. #StopHateForProfit is a week-long campaign driven by the Stop Hate for Profit Coalition and includes partnerships with the Anti-Defamation League and the NAACP, to name a few. Personally, I'm just glad there isn't a song attached to this movement.
Imagine there's no heaven.
So here's another dramatic chapter in a story we thought was already wrapped up. WNBA star Maya Moore and Jonathan Irons, the man she helped free from prison after a wrongful conviction, announced they're married on Good Morning America.
We wanted to announce today that we are super excited to continue the work that we've been doing together, but doing it as a married couple.
Despite her all-star status, Moore sat out 2 seasons to put more focus on overturning Irons' conviction from 23 years ago. The couple met during Moore's 2007 visit to the Jefferson City Correctional Facility in Missouri. Moore and Irons say they were actually married over the summer, and Twitter is lit up about this, which, yeah, it's a pretty wild love story. Good luck following that with your little meet cute or whatever. I know we were all a bit caught up with President Trump's interview with Bob Woodward, where he said back in March that he played down the coronavirus so not to cause panic. But that wasn't the only thing worth examining a bit further. Trump also made mention of some secret nuclear weapons system that had folks going, huh? Newsy's Sasha Ingber spoke to some experts to explain what Trump could have been referring to.
But I have built a weapon system that nobody's ever had in this country before.
In Bob Woodward's recordings with President Trump, this remark caught the attention of the national security community.
We have stuff that you haven't even seen or heard about. We have stuff that Putin and Xi have never heard about before.
Trump boasted of a new weapon system in December, and Woodward says he confirmed the system. But what exactly was the president referring to?
It's always hard to figure out exactly what he's talking about.
Many scientists say the president was likely alluding to the W-76-2, a nuclear warhead on a submarine, modified to release less energy than its predecessor, making a smaller explosion with less collateral damage.
The United States has never possessed before a tactical nuclear warhead on board a submarine-launched ballistic missile. If there's a military air base outside of a city, you could theoretically use that weapon against that target without too much affecting the civilians in the city.
The W-76-2 was first described by the Trump administration in 2018, essentially as a way to deter Russia. It was deployed secretly from the waters of Georgia on a patrol at the end of 2019, around the time the president spoke with Woodward. But a scientist who first disclosed the deployment of the nuclear weapon remains skeptical.
It's not like this thing can do something fundamentally different than the others can, except explode with less yield. So I'm not sure that necessarily fits the description.
Some scientists believe the president may have been referring to hypersonic missiles, which can travel at 5 times the speed of sound.
We have, I call it the super duper missile, and I heard the other night 17 times faster than what they have right now.
So he likes this sort of, super duper things and stuff that is impressive and whatever, but it's much harder to, sort of take his word and read closely into the sentences.
Neither the White House nor Woodward immediately responded to a request for comment, but the Defense Department tells Newsy hypersonics are a modernization priority. We're focused on tactical, conventional air, land, and sea-based hypersonic systems. We plan to field hypersonic systems in the early to mid-2020s, starting in 2023. Asked recently to clarify remarks to Woodward as his book Rage hits newsstands, the president chose to keep it vague.
There are systems that nobody knows about, including you, and we have some systems that nobody knows about, and frankly, I think I'm better off keeping it that way.
I would say that he probably hasn't disclosed anything. Anything he has made allies as well as adversaries even more confused.
Sasha Ingber, Newsy.
Many people out west have dealt with wildfires before, but that doesn't mean there isn't a breaking point. California is having its worst fire season again, meaning many residents have been through this before. People are resilient, but with wildfires leveling towns across the West, it's hard not to wonder how much more they can take. National reporter Amanda Brandeis takes us into one Northern California county that's seeing this disaster play out for a second time in 2 years.
When they see the smoke or hear about a fire, their PTSD, whether you're civilian or former military, it kicks in.
Quite frankly, it looked like a freight train.
A freight train of fire, swallowing everything in its path.
We're seeing erratic fire behavior that some of us have never seen in our career.
Capable of leaving a town unrecognizable.
They still haven't been able to get up there to see their property.
Michael Zylstra says his aunt and uncle won't have a home to come back to. Miles of Berry Creek houses have been reduced to rubble.
It's a scenario where the vegetation's completely bone dry.
The town is a casualty of the North Complex fire. Fueled by years of drought and extreme winds, the massive fire has burned 29 days in Northern California.
It took a huge toll on the community that it hit because it moved so fast. And we just didn't have the resources to put in there.
With resources spread across 28 major fires, Steve Kaufman says it's a challenge the state's had to adapt to.
I don't know if my house is still standing.
Zylstra evacuated his home 6 days ago in the nearby town of Cherokee. As he waits for news, he helps fellow veterans cope with the trauma.
They're anxious, They don't know what to do. They can't sleep.
In large part because the community went through this nearly 2 years ago when the Camp Fire ripped through the town of Paradise 15 miles away, killing 85 people and destroying nearly 19,000 structures.
Yeah, it's very painful memories for a lot of them.
Too painful for many to rebuild.
Paradise will never be what it was. It will never ever be what it was.
And now another town must also try and navigate life forever changed by fire.
We just need all to work together to take care of each other.
In Berry Creek, I'm Amanda Brandeis reporting.
So environmental activity is on 11 right now. Wildfires have burned millions of acres in the West, while the National Hurricane Center is running out of names for hurricanes forming in the Southeast. So what gives with all the environment-related weather? Newsy's Stephanie Sandoval tells us how climate scientists are breaking down these concurrent crises.
On the West Coast, one of the worst fire seasons in history. Thousands forced out of their homes, people killed. And on the other side of the country, one hurricane after another. Newsy spoke to climate scientists about what they think is causing it. Tim Brown, a research professor at the Desert Research Institute, says climate change, fuel buildup like fallen limbs and grass, and people all play a role in wildfires. Out of these three, he says the majority of fires are human-caused. A recent study by the University of Colorado Boulder found humans were responsible for starting 97% of home-threatening wildfires between 1992 and 2015 in the U.S.
I'm a little hesitant to say that climate change is causing all these fires when you do have these other pieces.
Temperatures are warming.
Yeah, no question about that. There's no question that that's a result of human activities.
But because of these warmer temperatures, natural fuels are becoming much drier. There's also a lot more fuel than before.
The fuel has built up so much. So when fire happens now, it can be a lot more severe. I'm personally not convinced that just because you keep increasing temperature means that fires are going to keep getting worse, because there may be a tipping point. So in other words, it doesn't matter how much more temperature you add. You've reached a point where the fires are going to burn very severely, right, and very aggressively anyway. And it's a research question now, how have we actually reached that point? Or do we still have a little ways to go?
As for hurricanes, there are some predictions as temperatures continue to warm.
We think that hurricanes in a warmer climate are going to have higher rainfall rates.
Scientists also think hurricanes will become more intense and the fraction of storms that reach Category 3 or higher will increase.
And we already see globally an increase in that fraction, looking at global data since the late 1970s.
But scientists are not sure why that's happening. More research is needed. Knutson says there hasn't been any long-term change in the number of hurricanes that have made landfall in the U.S. But according to data, they have seen an increase in Atlantic activity since the 1970s. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA, has predicted a busy hurricane season for the Atlantic. To date, NOAA says there have been 8 hurricanes in the Atlantic basin, 4 of which have made landfall onto the U.S. so far this year. And the hurricane season isn't over until November 30th. For Newsy, I'm Stephanie Sandoval.
If you're looking for a way to connect with us outside of the show, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop. DMs are open, but keep it holy. We're less than 50 days away from the general election, which means 2 things. 1, how the heck did it get so late in the year? And 2, Democrats and Republicans are doubling down on their strategies to reach voters. The 2 major political parties are aiming to drive up turnout, but they're going about it in very different ways. Newsy's Willie James Inman has more.
In an election year like no other, Republicans and Democrats are going about turning out supporters in very different ways. Joe Biden's campaign is avoiding in-person contact amid the pandemic. opting instead for virtual outreach. But for President Trump, it's all about the tried and true ground game that campaigns have relied on for decades.
What's going to help win this campaign are the volunteers, are those people that are basically going week to week, day by day, knocking on these doors.
The Trump campaign has utilized 2,000 staffers in 17 states to make key connections on the ground.
Gail Wilson, Black Voices for Trump.
And they say volunteers have knocked on hundreds of thousands of doors.
We've been building this ground game for the past 2 years. So we have a very sophisticated infrastructure in these targeted states. That's been our goal. It's where we've invested our resources. We're up to close to 2 million volunteers across the country in these targeted states. That's a record number that we've seen.
Mercedes Schlapp has traveled throughout the country on Women for Trump bus tours, amping up supporters and volunteers. She says the aim is to do outreach safely, but the president and his campaign have been widely criticized for holding large-scale rallies.
In February and January, he had all this information, yet he held rallies.
For Democrats, it's about reaching voters via their computers and phones.
Our digital tactics right now are all about replicating the experience a voter has when an organizer comes to their door.
Democrats are avoiding direct face-to-face contact, citing coronavirus concerns. It means they have knocked on way fewer doors than their GOP counterparts. Bergstein says the party and the Biden campaign have made millions of calls and connected with voters via text to drive up turnout. They also have about 2,000 staffers in at least 15 states.
You're talking about text messaging and using technology to reach out to voters, but do you risk losing out in terms of getting voters enthused about the election?
Absolutely not. And we're crushing Republicans across every field metric. If you look across the battleground states, we're beating Republicans in terms of registration. We're beating Republicans significantly in terms of vote by mail ballots requested and returned.
So which way will be more effective come November?
I think both of them are correct in some degree. We do know that door knocking and everything is a tried and true method of getting people to not only vote, but also to make political contributions. And a lot of people are getting their information digitally these days.
The virtual or ground game certainly isn't the only way campaigns are reaching out to voters. And Democrats appear to have a TV ad advantage over Republicans, with Joe Biden's campaign dominating the airwaves in several states. Now, experts say this could be an interesting case study in effective ways in reaching out to voters and lead to lasting changes in campaigns to come. Willie James Inman, Newsy.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back with more In the Loop tomorrow. Same time, same place. More top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.